Aiga Tangen, from a Chinese perspective, from a Beijing perspective where you are, how is this conflict being seen? How is the ceasefire being viewed?
All right, first, let me correct something you said. I'm not half Chinese, I'm half Korean. I'm an American citizen. I was born in Washington, D.C. So putting that aside, what I see in China is that they're relieved that Pakistan and India have come to some sort of understanding. They're not interested in any kind of conflict, especially on their borders. So at this point, they're very happy if it can be settled. But the question is, how can it be settled? From Beijing's point of view, they'd like to see a real settlement, something that puts this kind of bloodshed in the past. No one is supporting any terrorist who did these incredibly terrible things. Slaughtering civilians does not, I'm sorry, as opposed to my colleague, it does not make you a hero. And if you think somebody's a hero because they slaughtered innocent people, I think you need to re-examine your values. So from that perspective, everybody condemns in Beijing and China the killing of tourists. That's not an issue. The issue is, how do you bring peace? Now, what is a little bit troubling in Beijing is the fact that there has been no investigation. There have been allegations that this has been supported by the Pakistani government. There would be a very, very different reaction if, in fact, it was shown that the military government or civilian government or whatever was officially behind this. But we haven't had that shown. What we have is had allegations. The second part is that China needs really to figure out what they, how they want to respond to this. It's not a situation where they can go forward with either side. And they're wondering why these two groups have not gone back to the SCO. I mean, this was this is the main issue for SCO, and both countries are part of it. They should be going back to that entity and saying, we demand, all right? India should be going there and say, we demand accountability. If this organization has any kind of legitimacy, it has to go forward and it has to make an investigation and it has to make a determination as to what happened. And if, Pakistan is fine.
You see, effectively what you're saying is that India must take its case to the world bodies like the SCO. But Sandeep Unithan, the fact of the matter is India has now for the longest time said that, look, we do not trust the Pakistani state anymore because we've tried in the past to have a dialogue and it's never worked. In fact, we even reached out to Pakistan after the Pathankot attack in 2016, allowed the ISI to actually come to this country and even get involved in the investigation, and then realized that we were getting nowhere. Eventually, we had Uri. Pakistan has betrayed us time and again. Do you therefore believe that a new line in the sand has been drawn by Operation Sindhu? And in that sense, that's the big achievement of the Modi government this time.
Absolutely, Rajiv. Firstly, thank you for having me on your show. And secondly, what has happened, Rajiv, in the last couple of days is unprecedented possibly in the history of conflict or, operations below the military threshold, as they call it. Nuclear weapons have been around for about 80 years now, since 1945. Nuclear-armed countries have clashed twice before. That's the Soviet Union and China in 1969. But these were border clashes. The air forces of either side were not used, and ballistic missiles were certainly not fired at each other. Now, coming back to 1999, India and Pakistan clashed once again at Kargil, but the air forces of both sides did not cross the international border or did not drop weapons at each other, and ballistic missiles were certainly not fired. But what we have seen with Operation Sindhu is unprecedented in the fact that Pakistan chose to fire ballistic missiles at India. There have been some missiles that were shot down not far from Delhi, 250 kilometers. Highly irresponsible action. No country in the history of, no nuclear-armed country in the history of the world has ever fired a ballistic missile at another nuclear-armed country for fear of this being seen as a possible nuclear weapons launch. And India had no option then, Rajdeep, to retaliate by striking at two very key strategic Pakistani bases, which are connected with Pakistan's nuclear weapons program, that is Sargodha and Chaklala. Of course, these bases, the names of these bases have been changed. So in a sense, what India was doing in the last few days was to respond to Pakistan's nuclear weapons-enabled terrorism. That's what Pakistan has been doing for the last 27 years. The fact that no nuclear-armed country fights with another, and that is what Pervez Musharraf started in Kargil. After the nuclear tests of '98, he started exploring the space below the nuclear threshold for conventional military operations. And that morphed into terror attacks, very large terror attacks, like the attack on the parliament in 2001, the Mumbai terror attacks of 2006 and 2008, and then finally what happened in Pahalgam. So the government of India, in one sense, is signaling, Prime Minister Modi is signaling the fact that enough is enough. We have had enough of nuclear blackmail. We are not going to be deterred by your nuclear weapons, and the fact that every time we try and attack you conventionally or try punishing you conventionally, you wave nuclear weapons, and then you call the rest of the world, the Chinese, and you call the Americans to try and solve the thing, which is what seems to have happened in this case as well. When India struck at those bases, it's quite likely that Pakistan went running to the US and asked for a halt to the hostilities because it saw the kind of damage that was inflicted upon Pakistani bases and installations in that 1 hour or so series of attacks by the Indian Air Force on the 10th of May. So very unprecedented level of signaling, and Prime Minister Modi has actually pushed up the escalation ladder, and he's kind of said, look, we are not going to be like what previous prime ministers have had to go through. They were deterred by the weapon, but he clearly is not deterred by Pakistan's nuclear weapons program.
But the question then arises, will this new doctrine, the so-called Modi doctrine, actually only destabilize the region, or will it ensure peace? That's the big question. How fragile is the India-Pak ceasefire is my next question that I want to pose, because there is the danger, of course, that this could once again spiral out of control, and that's the fear. Mr. Bartola there in... let me take that to you, Mr. Grossman, first. Do you believe that this, when you're, Derek Grossman, when you're dealing with two countries that are nuclear neighbors and have the use of modern technology, of modern warfare technology, can the peace ever really hold? Or do you believe that we are now heading for increasingly unstable times in the subcontinent?
Yeah, so I think I think you hit the nail on the head there in terms of talking about their modern technology. I mean, unfortunately for everybody, it just becomes too easy to commence military operations again. I mean, when you look at the 4 days of conflict, you had the use of missiles, you had the use of drones, right? You had really actually standoff missile firings, right? So in other words, neither Pakistan nor India actually had to go into each other's airspace all that far or even at all in order to fire off missiles to hit targets, right? And so this is like because it's so easy, it makes it more likely, that military operations commence again. But on the other hand, and I think a very important factor here is that we've seen a battle of narratives take place between Pakistan and India, right? Who won the war? And that's played out predominantly on social media, but elsewhere as well. And I think with both countries claiming victory, then that proved to be a viable off-ramp, that India has done enough damage to the quote-unquote terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan, and Pakistan negated enough of India's attack by shooting down allegedly 5 Indian fighter aircraft. Of course, India disputes that, but having those types of narratives out there to say we've been successful, that I think promotes further stability in the future, because there is no need to go to war again if you've already accomplished your objective. So there really are some competing factors here.